And we are live here on Plus One EXP Actual Play. Well, not Actual Play. Roll for Content channel. We're not doing an actual play. That's tonight. Come back at 8 p.m. for that. Plus One is a weird little brand that multi-classes in tabletop game design, beard and skincare alchemy, and the Bardic College of Content Creation. Our hope and our desire is to help great designers find amazing players who love their games and help amazing players find great designers whose games they can love. We do that through a mix of interviews, reviews, and actual play content. Today we are sitting down as part of our Prestige class series with Wayne Robert of the Memento Mori, Memento Vivere game that just recently launched. And it's one part OSR RPG setting, and it is also 5th edition compatible, but it does have a rules light system in it, and I can't wait to learn more about it. But rather than me memorizing a bunch of details about who Wayne is, I figured I'd just let Wayne introduce himself. Wayne, go ahead and tell people who you are, what you do, and tell us a little bit about Memento Mori, Memento Vivere.
Sure. Thank you so much, Tony, and thanks for having me here. So Memento Mori, Memento Vivere is Latin for remember you will die, remember to live. And it is a saying that is near and dear to a good friend of mine. He and his wife are escape artists, and they travel throughout the country, sometimes even overseas at the Renaissance Fair. Those of you who have been to Renaissance fairs throughout the country might know Dr. Judas Lynch and Miss Magnolia Strange. And so he and I have been friends for many years. We've played D&D together, and we talked about the idea because we're both professional entertainers for our day jobs, but we're gamers by passion. I've also written and done game design. He's like, well, what if I do a game that ties into our show but isn't just a gimmick, because you see all the gimmicky games that are out there that tie in with different products and companies, but he wanted to do something different. And we are both aficionados and fans of the esoteric and the mysterious. We like philosophy, and he and I have a lot of differences, but a lot of overlap. And we wanted to explore some themes in a setting, because role-playing games allow people to come together and play a game, but also to take on these other roles and to explore themes and ideas in the safety of our own home. We're not actually going out murdering goblins and climbing 1,000-foot cliff faces, and we're not risking anything. We're just rolling some dice and having fun. But the imagination space is huge, and philosophy is kind of like that. So we talked about the themes of Franz Kafka and Albert Camus and Schopenhauer, and the darker elements of like H.P. Lovecraft's like horror of the mind. And we wanted to find those elements that draw people to the genre. That's not even sure if it's like a horror genre so much as it's just a spooky genre. And we wanted to talk about what it means to live, what it means to die, what meaning is, and explore that through a game, because like adventurers are constantly creating their own meaning, whether you're going through an adventure path, playing something that's pre-scripted, or you're just OSR sandboxing it. You are creating that story together, and you find that meaning together. So we wanted to kind of emulate that through something. So we had all these talks for years, and eventually it culminated in this book, this project, Memento Mori, Memento Vivere. So it started as just an adventure path, and then we're like, well, we need to have a setting for the adventure to take place in that can work anywhere. So we created the demi plane, and I wrote all the little bits, and I was like, hey, is it okay if I throw in some like references to like J.M. Barrie's Neverland, and can I throw in some? He's like, yeah, do it. So I had a creative carte blanche to just make this weird, strange, dark, somber place. So the setting is a demi-plane called Anon that exists somewhere between here and the hereafter. Whether you want to use it as a self-contained plane similar to Ravenloft is, or if you want to drop it in your own home campaign, just as an island in the ocean. I mean, it's pretty modular. There's an OSR product called Woodfall that's like that I love. It's a little like a little witch swamp out in the woods, and you could just plug that into your world. And I hope people will consider using it like that in their home games, where you might get sucked into a storm and end up on this island, or maybe if you're playing out in the Hot Springs Islands, you might sail off the coast. Nope, here you are in the demi-plane of Anon. Whoops, good luck getting out. So this place is it's dark. There's no light. There's these strange orbs that float around. There are will-o-wisps that provide light. There are cults based around that. There's some tie-ins to Yog Sothoth and the Many Eyes. Uh, there are uh, there are mortal cultures that have lived there for countless eons, for many different planes and time periods. And what's neat about it is that we didn't want to have a high technology level in the setting, but we wanted to allow for that through something we call anachronisms. And because of the, I don't know, to quote the doctor, the wibbly wobbly, timey wimey mechanism of the demiplane, sometimes things from the future will pop up, or sometimes things from other planes of existence will pop up. So you might find some firearms or like a steel girded building, and people can't recreate them. They can try to reverse engineer them, but if you ever leave the plane, the memory of it's gone. And we're all used to Vancian magic, so that shouldn't be anything new. So yeah, no, the settings, it's a million different things, but I hope once you read it that you'll agree that it doesn't try to do too much. It's got a like an elegant interlocking mechanism. You've got living people living aside alongside the ghosts and spirits of the dead. And like, what would a world be like? Like when we play Dungeons and Dragons and fantasy role playing games, or if you were a White Wolf fan and played Wraith the Oblivion or anything like that, like some people explore it differently. But like, what would a world really be like that when if your uncle dies or your friend dies or you die, but you can continue on as some form of consciousness? What is that? Like you're untethered from your body, but some aspect of yourself continues on. Is that your soul? Is it your mind? So we try to explore that both through game mechanisms with player character options to play ghosts, but because you're untethered from your body, um, there is a level of disconnect, I guess you would say, from what like a normal living character would be. So we talked about like madness systems, but we also know not everybody wants to deal with madness. We talked about psyche and all of these things. And what we ended up with was like a series of paroxysms, these things that affect the psycho-spiritual nature of a sentient being. So madness is more than just it's not mental illness. And we actually we are very careful and we address that in the book. We wanted to be very respectful that madness in this game can exist in tandem with and separate from mental illness. Um, you're not role playing the traits of real world things. Instead, this is something that affects you in a supernatural way. We were trying to go back to more of like a pseudo historical mythological element there, but I mean, if you're casting spells and you're dealing with deities and devils and other planes of existence and teleportation, like it's almost like there's a magical radiation that kind of infuses.
Mm.
And the OSR is like really great for that, almost borderline like mutations and things like that. So we kind of wanted to incorporate how that affected players that are alive as well as ghosts. So when you die, you actually use your psyche and your madness points and things differently than when you're alive. So when you're alive versus a ghost. Sorry, getting mixed up there.
That's
Uh,
awesome.
yeah,
No, I love it. Like I said, I just having looked through it, I'll pop it up here. Just give it a little scroll for people who haven't seen it yet. Like it's an absolutely gorgeous book. Like I said, I just have gotten through the first few pages of it as my computer here lags out, because it is not a small book either. Like it is not a huge tome, but it's topping out at 132 pages. It's a good sized volume, but it's absolutely gorgeous. Tons of art, like well laid out. And yeah, you guys have the physical copies in.
yeah.
It's a big, gorgeous book. Uh, and so I'm super excited to hear just a little bit more about the development of the process, kind of how things moved and went along as we kind of go through it. But it sounds like an absolute blast to play in, and I love the idea of really taking some of those kind of existential and esoteric conversations and saying, like, we want to create a place in between, which, especially if you're looking at, in OSR or a Dungeons and Dragons, whatever edition, but let's say fifth, so often character death is just the end, as opposed to saying, hey, like there's this other place we can go and play in, and it unlocks a lot of like, so what if you don't want to just have resurrection be cheap, but what if there's a place you need to go in order to
Oh yeah.
encounter the dead to bring them back, or like or to usher them across. Or there's tons of great things in Western culture
Yeah.
that you can play on within this concept of this space in between that y'all have created, that I think creates so many interesting opportunities for play. If you're out there watching right now, wherever you're watching, feel free to let us know if you have questions about this setting. Go ahead and drop them in the chat also too. But I do want to ask Robert, so it's invariably somebody, whatever they first refer to, how they refer to OSR matters to me. And you said the OSR. So for people who
Oh,
out there who may not be familiar with it, it just doesn't matter.
yeah, yeah.
Everything's good here.
Yeah.
Uh, some people refer to OSR as a genre, like something is OSR. Some people refer to OSR if it was a thing,
Oh
like
man.
the OSR. Some people refer to OSR as if it was a place where certain people hang out. Everybody talks about OSR a little bit differently. So
Sure.
I always love to ask people when they're designing specifically with an old school kind of mindset in play within their games, like tell us a
Okay.
little bit about how you perceive what OSR is and
Yeah.
why that was attractive to you.
Absolutely. So for me, with the OSR, the old school Renaissance or revival, I think I just the Renaissance, it's almost like a mini zeitgeist in gaming culture to me. I don't know if it's a genre so much as it's a movement with a lot of different moving parts. The For me, the crux of it is it's a design philosophy and a gaming approach. When you're at the table, you are allowing the players to use their own creativity and ingenuity. And there is a real risk reward mechanism in place, regardless of what system you decide to use. For me, it's not just about recreating the games from the 70s and 80s. It's about creating a real sense of danger and a real sense of risk reward and a real sense of cost. So if I do a thing like and there's a risk involved, then I want to know that that risk is rewarded if it succeeds, and if it's not, then I fail. But I made that choice as a player. It's not arbitrary. Although a lot of older games have very arbitrary elements to them. So, like for
The
the
arbitrariness comes in the generation of circumstance, not
yes,
not on the, it's actually on more on the mechanical side of running a game
yes,
in OSR that an arbitrary thing may come into play, but it's not on the player choice side typically.
and this is why uh, I and the project creators, Judas and Magnolia. This is why we talked about incorporating that OSR philosophy, because we wanted to have the philosophical elements such as Camus and Kafka. And honestly, Kafka is Kafka is old D&D adventures. Like it is pointless. It is railroaded. It is in a lot of cases, not all. Some of them are very sandboxy, but some things feel very arbitrary and out of the player's control. But they're not. And sometimes you have the illusion of choice when you design adventures, because you can only account for so many things. You have to, if you're designing an adventure, there has to be points along that path, whether they be planned or planned for. So again, with the OSR, we're trying to the OSR philosophy. We're trying to incorporate that sense of risk reward. Like you can die in this game. We have limited, like the demi plane of a non actually like inhibits healing magic a little bit. So especially for folks who want to use this with fifth edition, I love fifth edition, but fifth edition holds your hand, every step of the way. It really does. And that's great for narrative play and for people who um, get really attached to their characters and have a hard time letting them go. But it also allows you to play, medieval fantasy superheroes. You're all the X-Men. It's great. That's a fun play style. It is. But if you want to play your nitty gritty, grungy, grimy, you know, downtrodden souls who are desperate and trying to make some coin, this book supports both of those styles of play, and it accounts for both of those styles of play. I think. I hope. And we'll let you decide that. We wanted it to be both, but be more OSR and philosophy. And I think we succeeded. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it brings us to a good point. Like y'all designed a rules light system to go with
Mm.
this. It's not just
Oh
the
yeah.
setting, right? So tell us a little bit about that system, and kind of and like having looked through it, like it is very evident like that system creates a good bridge between like OSR mindset
Mhm.
and modern sensibilities, and then takes what's common about them both and plugs it into kind of a central
Oh,
matrix. But tell
okay.
us a little bit about the system itself.
For sure. So it's 4 pages, letter size, 4 pages. I probably spent way too long working out the kinks on that for what essentially is a house ruled version of like the D20 engine. But it is in my estimation the gap between what the bridge that between that gap between like say fifth edition and third edition and OSR games such as the Black Hack and Knave and all of these other wonderful like retro clones and approximations. Like you got your ability scores, you've got your D20 chassis. It's D&D. It's just D&D slimmed and trimmed down. We very much use Ben Milton's concept and philosophy of the level of spells. I love Knave. Knave is a genuinely beautiful little system that does what it aims to do, and it does it well. And you can hack it and add to it. So the magic system, I absolutely attribute that to Ben Milton. I cannot take credit for the way that works. The rest of it is just what I liked best from newer and older editions of D&D, and tried to present it in a way that was user friendly. So control panel design, very simple, easy to understand rules, and it allows for that risk reward, while also allowing dynamic play.
Yeah. And so people who are porting this to fifth edition potentially, we don't talk a lot about fifth edition on the channel, not because I don't play it. And
Yeah.
it's one of those things that I try to be very like honest about the games I love and the games I play,
Yeah.
without disliking or hating anybody who that's your jam. And that's great. I love what you said about hand holding. And creating a setting where it's like, healing magic works less well here, creating some of those systematic things that say, hey, like if you're used to it, it's just local here. When you go back to your normal setting, like you're fine. What are some of the other things if somebody's a fifth edition
Oh, sure.
adventurer dropping down to this plane that might surprise them?
Oh man. So there's a lot of lack of clear motivations at the NPCs. There's a lot of you kind of you have to explore and interact to learn. It's not just presented to you on a platter like this is how things are. Here's your gazetteer. Welcome to the almost afterlife. This person sells you armor. This person's a pain in the butt. This person's the thieves guild. All of those things are detailed. Many different factions, many different moving parts, many different motivations. There's a really great like random NPC generator system. Lots of tables. Love random tables, but there's lots of tables. You can just use those in your home game. If nothing else, there's dozens of random tables you can pull out of this book. So it doesn't lead you like it's not like even the adventure. It's not like a Pathfinder adventure path. It doesn't give you the cinematic experience from start to finish. Instead, what it does is it gives you a series of vignettes that you choose to interact with in different ways. And behind the scenes, there are some of those Kafka-esque, and in our game design world, one might even say railroading elements, but they'll never be seen in play, ever. And only the GM is ever going to see that. And it's they're bottleneck points on a flow chart, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
such that if you go here, here, and there, these other events will continue to go on regardless of the player's actions, and they may or may not loop back around and then have consequences in the future.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I guess for me, it's that exploration mindset, the idea that the players, their choices and decisions are rewarded with catastrophe or with reward, but they make those choices. It's not like they are told, okay, here's what you do next. Here's the NPC that says this is what you do. Here's your gold upon arrival. It's a lot more nuanced than that, I guess.
Yeah. If you're just joining us now, because I know Bill Edmonds mentioned it, Wayne has recently released or recently got into print after a successful Kickstarter last year, correct? The Memento Mori, Memento Vivere game setting, which is for OSR and 5th edition compatible with its own rules, light system. And LARP Strong Carter, I will not turn off the camera. If you have beard envy, then you need to just go to plus1exp.com and pick up some of our tabletop inspired beard-based beard bombs based on classic RPG stats. You can go there and low key LARP every single day. And so, or whatever, pick up one of our games. If you don't have a beard, you can go there and buy Beards and Beyond. It's basically a tabletop RPG beard simulator, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about Memento Mori, Memento Vivere, which, yeah, reading through it, the initial like really strong vibes it gave me was just as touchstones were like, okay, this is a really phenomenal OSR that feels a lot like Blades in the Dark. Like there's a really strong kind of, there's a lot of factions, a lot of moving pieces, a lot of things that can be happening in the city. You're not going to be big players in this city unless you spend a lot of time here, and even then your ability to counteract any of these forces, because there are so many of them, is very minimal. There are ghosts that are walking around that are a part of things. Like there was a lot of really great things that kept things in a very classic D20 engine system, but thematically had a lot of really great Blades touchstones. I love you talking about Kafka, because yeah, Kafka doesn't ask the question why. Kafka asks the question, now what? It's like, it's very existential. It's very much like, yes, you have woke up as a giant cockroach, or you're, the steamer on a ship. And here's what your life is like. And what are we all doing now? Right? Like there's not a lot of a conceit for why in this world, but all of those things still have a place from a player standpoint of still allowing you to wonder about those things, which Kafka does the same thing for his readers. Like you should be asking yourself this question, even if the characters in the book aren't, because the characters are just going from plot point to plot point to instill wonder in you. And it's really interesting, like, to be designing in OSR with that mindset because of the bleeding thin, like, separation between player and character knowledge in OSR, right? Like you're not, it's affecting something a little bit different because players are being asked to consider that on behalf of their characters without any real separation between that. But it's not necessarily something that characters themselves have to be overly concerned with them play. They can just do the thing still. And I think it's just a really interesting thing to play around with from a meta narrative standpoint. Like I really love the idea of that. And so Marcy Little says the book sounds great. Where can I buy it? Let me go ahead and if you type in Marcy, since you are on Twitch, if you type in ! The game, it'll drop you a link to Drive Through RPG. Is it just digital, or is it going to be print on demand, or if people want to get physical copies, how do they do that?
So here's the fun thing. So we had some interesting licensing arrangements for how to develop this book from the original Kickstarter to the current implementation. So physical books exist. We are shipping them to our backers from the original project before we ever sell them physically to anybody else. Then the first run of physical books will be sold at the live shows at Renaissance fairs throughout the country of Judas and Magnolia, the escape artists. You can see them at judasandmagnolia.com. They'll also be selling them through their websites once that batch is out. From that point forward, digital sales, Drive Through RPG, potentially Itch, and other platforms in the future. And then there will be derivative works, which will include the setting without the adventure and the adventure without the setting. The first book has them both combined, but we're going to try to trim them down so folks can get them at a more affordable rate in the future. So there's a lot of juggling and interesting stuff going on there.
It is. I scrolled through a little bit earlier. We'll put some more up. Absolutely gorgeous. You were talking about some of the random tables. There's like D66 street performers, D88 like weird objects. We're looking at on the screen right now, D66 random graffiti generator. All these different little pieces that y'all have worked in. Is the art one artist? Is it a mix of artists? How did y'all source the art for this project?
Sure. So the art is a mixture. Most of it is from me using honestly mostly Gustave Doré public domain art, and then collaging it and digitally altering it such that it's hard to create a medieval, almost Victorian city in a very, very dark realm without referencing Gustave Doré. Like he was the master of that imagery. So what I did is I took and I just montaged city on top of city to make this giant, like, imagine a city that was built on top of itself for countless thousands of years and on top of its own graveyards for countless thousands of years. And I can't draw that. I wish I could. I wish I could. So I found the public domain artist and put that all together. And then some of the other artists were actually photographers from that took photos of Dr. Judas Lynch and Miss Magnolia Strange, and I got permission from them to digitally alter those images to make them fit for a more RPG friendly product. I didn't want to do live action photos the way some of the 90s like RPGs and White Wolf used to do. I wanted to make them look like illustrations. So I got their permission to do that, and they're credited in the book. And so yeah, that's the majority of it. And there's a couple images I did myself. So if you're wondering why there's a slightly inconsistent style there, that's all that is. But I hope that you can see here. This is a painting of Dr. Judas Lynch by one of their fans, Eric Schoolcraft. Um, there are maps. There's like here's one by 2 Minute Table Tap that was used. There is here's a digitally altered photograph of so a little bit of everything there, and
Yeah.
then last one, and then we'll get back to the main part there. One of the big encounter scenes, and speaking of Kafka, there's a afterlife bureaucratic mess where you end up battling a disgruntled, really dark spirit in a giant office with many filing cabinets that he can telekinetically thrust out at you after the floor drops away with a giant grinding machine underneath. This really great little set piece adventure that you can possibly interact with there.
Yeah. Well, and with the darkness and everything, there is a lot of humor mixed through this, right? So, like up
Yes.
next to us on the screen right now, I'm on the D20 jousts page, which
Oh God, yes,
then
yes.
details like corn
Very,
dog eating contest. Supplicants
yes.
in the know can forego any joust by declaring a corn dog eating contest.
Oh, it's the
This
best.
contest includes any supplicants who wish to compete, plus twice as many Baron Court members. Most of them are fairies, but a few are goblins, trolls, satyrs, and others join as well. GM's note: corn dogs are an anachronistic delicacy among the fairies of the Baron Court. If this goes against your sensibilities, feel free to substitute pies or something else. And then rules for how that jousting contest goes. But there's 19 more options above for what different combats could look like, which would be things you would expect, plus things like or mounted combat with ghouls as steeds. But also things like a dance off or alligator wrestling or an archery contest, all of which are like somewhat dark because the archery contest is shoot dead rats off of each other's heads. And so like there's this sense of you've created this very dark, very heavy setting, and then injected a lot of life and a lot of humor into it down below the setting, which are the kind of things that I feel like you see evolve naturally at a table. Like you see those moments of humor, and lots of times a setting itself or a system itself doesn't provide the means to say, yeah, you just want to do something outrageous right now. Like you want to challenge the count to a corn dog eating
Sure.
contest. Like there's actually, yeah, that's absolutely 100% a thing you can do. And you happen to know that. You happen to know how
Yeah,
you would
and
go about doing that.
I'm glad that you noticed that dichotomy there already, just by the skim through that you've done. That was a design philosophy of the setting. Was like we've mentioned Kafka already, but we haven't talked about Camus. And Camus is about the absurdity of life,
Right.
not just the meaningless of that life that Kafka has, but hope in the face of absurdity. And that's something that D&D characters do all the time. They always hope. They will fight more often than they will run away. They will keep pushing, and in the face of impossible odds they will persevere and push forward. And that's part of why we really wanted to do this as an RPG and not just as some, like, I don't know, like a comic book or something.
Right.
We wanted to have it interactive, and the really dark, grim and gritty surface world where all the mortals live, it's depressing, but at the same time the people have hope and they strive and they find happiness in their little sections, even though it's a very dark and kind of barren place. And then in the afterlife, the tone shifts, almost to like a Tim Burton esque or similar such like afterlife, where it's a little goofy, it's a little um, there's this level of bureaucratic just mess, this quagmire of like purgatory like ghost life if you actually go into the to that near afterlife. um and you get a taste of that in the adventure, like when the adventurers first arrive on the island, kind of thing. Like some of our playtesters were like that scared them more than anything else was like getting stuck in bureaucratic red tape, and I was like, good, because that's how
Yeah.
that's how it
It's
should be.
it's meant to be a little bit terrifying,
Yeah, yes,
right?
yes.
And like, one of the things Burton does well is put, like, again, takes this deeply macabre piece and puts
Mhm.
the absurd right in the middle of it.
Yeah,
Like it
yeah,
and if a character is hopeful in the absurdist world of Tim Burton, they are automatically a hero, right? Like
right.
because hope is something that people in most of his settings have abandoned
Mhm.
fully. And so there's an interesting play there that I just think is super great. And it's like, it's also really nice to see how you've blended a lot of these touchstones, both kind of traditional philosophy ones as well as like modern reference as well. And then seeing those pieces kind of overlap. But yeah, I love, like, I think indie RPGs embrace the absurdity really well. And I think that's one of the things that OSR does, that the high fantasy concept of Dungeons and Dragons, like, we may sit around the table and funny things may happen, but at the
Mhm.
end of the day, like, a lot of people have this higher, more noble feeling. And in the, like, the knockdown, drag out, do what you can to survive world of like OSR realities, like, yeah, no, sometimes you've got to come at something completely sideways, and that's going to mean a really weird way to
Yeah.
resolve a problem. Indie games, by their conceit, then have like, well, we may be proposing the absurd thing as the norm, and takes it even a step further than that. But I also love the idea of like bureaucracy as a point of horror
Mhm.
in this setting also too. Like
Oh yeah.
that's such an interesting piece. So no, I love it. Tell me, so you guys developed this project. This project came out of y'all having these conversations,
Yeah.
playing games together, other things like that. What was the actual development process like? How did you go from we're friends
Yeah.
who have these conversations and play games together to we should write this down and do a Kickstarter and have a printed book for this?
Sure. I wish there was a clear template for it. It kind of evolved organically. Like I said, I don't know if I should real name drop him or not, but the character, the character of Judas Lynch is played by a really dear friend of mine, and he and I have been playing games together for many years, and we've played chess a lot together. We incorporated a chess puzzle into the adventure path because we wanted to like throw some chess in there, even though it's an Earth game, but anachronisms. But we we wanted to bring something new and different. Like we love the indie OSR games. We love like Into the Odd and Troika and Knave and the Black Hack and Morkborg and just all of it that's out there. It's beautiful. It's new. It's fresh. It's a it's that injection that the world needs. But at the same time, like uh, there's a lot of people playing fifth edition. There's a lot of people playing the Pathfinder games. There's a lot of people playing their other older editions they love, and we wanted to find something that kind of bridged that gap. And now that 5e is out and OSR games also clone them, and uh, Pathfinder, like it's at the end of the day, D&D is like roll a d20, add some stuff, see what happens. Like and then it's just so I guess I'm digressing here. It's the process for actually designing it was just a series of conversations. We would talk about the different philosophers and how they would tie into D&D games, like I mentioned, like characters striving against the face of impossible odds, the futility and the absurdity of a lot of adventure paths and railroading events, the nature of a world where not just magic exists, but resurrection or lichdom or ghosts with sentience and unfinished business. And we know that in the 90s, like Wraith the Oblivion tried to, I mean, it's a cool game. The World of Darkness games are cool. They're not something that speak to me personally, but they have really rich lore. They have this whole thing with like different psychological elements and physical objects that tie them, and that's cool if you want to get really into it. But we wanted a much lighter approach to ghosts than that, and so we were like, okay, we have to be careful not to tread on their territory because at the end of the day, they are ghosts. The RPG, we can't do what they did. And then we were while we were doing research, we are like, oh yeah, remember in third edition there was that Ghost Walk game. So we have to be careful not to tread on their territory too, because we don't want Wizards of the Coast coming after us for similarities. Because how many games can you make about ghosts and humans living on the nexus of the afterlife? So we think we did our own little, I don't know, goth, spooky, philosophical, creepy, fun. I wish I had. I can't even describe my own work. It's its own beast. It really is its own beast. But it's still D&D at the end of the day, and that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to bring a fresh perspective, focusing on uh, death and meaning. Remember that we're all gonna die one day. Like, you're gonna die. I'm gonna die. Everybody we know and love is gonna die. It's gonna break all of our hearts. But in the meantime, we have to live and we have to persevere and we have to strive. And that's what we do every day at the table when we play D&D. We play these characters that literally live that out. That idea of striving in the face of impossible odds, trying to get great riches and rewards, having a great time with our friends and comrades, and then doing it again the next day until eventually, we hit 0 hit points, or we roll 3 death saves, or we fail that, save against the beholder's death ray. Like, it's just, at the end of the day, that's what it is. We're approximating that cosmic struggle we all live in the real life.
Which is interesting. I wasn't going to bring this up, but like, it feels like a good touchstone. Like, right before this went live, you and I were talking about our individual responses to the death of an individual within the gaming community. So if you guys aren't familiar with Tiago Rolam, he passed away due to COVID-19, and his brother Lucas is a phenomenal member, and so is Tiago of the RPG community, and we are going to miss Tiago so much, and he has had such an impact, even for people who lived across the world from him. I mean, we live in a different hemisphere of the planet, and I know the Roland brothers, and so does Wayne, and my response, knowing them and having my own like spiritual background, was, I'm going to get a few masses said. And yours was like, we're going to have a punk rock funeral in the backyard and pour out some whiskey. And that both of those things are beautiful experiences that are grasping at honoring somebody who's gone through this. And there's a conversation there that we're all dealing with, and that games, when they allow character death to happen, and happen in interesting ways, and allow us to examine that, allow us to go deeper into that conversation, which isn't for every game, right? But is a real thing that each and every single one of us do at different points in our life deal with. And this setting being built around, I think, something that Tiago and Lucas would say, like, right now, like, Tiago's so full of life. Like, that was a huge part of what was so amazing about him. And like, in the middle of this, like, saying like, hey, we have to remember that death is a reality while simultaneously seeking the fullness of life. And I think so many of us come to the table looking for the thrill and the experience of a full life in an imaginary way, but also in the way of just sitting down with some of our friends and telling a great story. Yeah. And sometimes I think there's no better way to honor people we've loved and we've lost than to sit around and tell stories about them, or tell stories that they allowed to happen. So like, Numa is an RPG that exists out there right now. I'll go grab a URL so I can drop it in the chat. It's right there. Wait, for people who aren't familiar, not your game, totally somebody else's game, but let's talk about it real quick. Tell people who aren't familiar with Numa what it is while I grab that URL.
God. This was such a great little genius concept. So the design, the layout was beautiful. This is Tiago Rolam's Numa, and it is samurai frogs, but you're not just like frog folk, you're actual frog-sized frogs that live in an approximation of feudal Japan. And it just is beautiful all the way through. A lot of it's public domain art, but the layout here is just, it's gorgeous. Like, if you can get the print, get the print, but if you get the PDF, it's totally worth it. They have a really interesting like combat and advancement system. It's very simple. The Roland brothers love minimalistic RPG systems, like usually 2d6, 2d10, because for them it's about what happens at the table. It's about that role play. It's about the story and the collaboration, less than the crunch. And this is a nice balance. It allows you to advance through paths of Bushido and I forget all the terms for it, but you can speak like magical elemental words, and like your family and your honor play into it. And like, it's such a genius little game. And I am so grateful to have, like, been around for a little bit of that. And if you get a chance to check out Numa, Numa, and you just want to check it out, like Samurai Frogs, man, like this is a great game. I've never seen anything quite like it. It is, I think, 60 pages long, A5 format. Like this is a gem. Like you could probably use this as a standalone game in addition to porting it into your home games, like taking the flavor and the fluff. Like I want all of my frog people and all of my future D&D games to be Samurai Frogs now. And like I don't know, it was a great product. It was a labor of love, and I know that Lucas has nominated him for an Emmy for this product. So I hope that they accept that. And if you all see it out there, if I don't know how that works for voting and stuff, but if there's votes and you like it, vote for it.
There, if it makes it to one of the I think top 5 for its category,
Okay.
which hopefully it will, then it goes to
Oh,
public
fingers
vote.
crossed.
So it's like a little bit judged, a little bit popularity contest.
Sure.
And so which, by the way, if you're out there watching, any submissions are due tomorrow.
Okay.
And so I think maybe today, who knows? It's always unclear when somebody says by a date, whether they mean before that date or on that date. But
Yeah.
um, no, just as a whatever. We had been talking about it right before we went live, and I think it is like people have I have a hard time with character death when I play like dungeon crawl classics. I have a hard time with character death. Like I know that 3 of my characters at least are going to be dying, and probably more than that, and I still struggle every single with no backstory, with no whatever, because I have a
Yeah.
hard time losing, and I still struggle with it. So lots of times when I play, it's like, hey, I'm just going to put a guy out there right away to die, to just kind of take the sting off the edge. But it is such a part of traditional RPGs that we really struggle with, and people did struggle with, especially if you went through a lot of characters finally had one achieve a modicum of success. You feel like they're invincible, and then a couple bad rolls of the die, and they were out of the game. And so it's interesting again to see the commentary on that, to be able to see how it even touches into our own life, and to see some of the philosophical elements y'all have put into it. Again, I think the book is absolutely gorgeous. If you just joined us, if you just started watching the last couple minutes, we're talking about Memento Mori, Memento Vivere, which is a an OSR slash 5th edition system agnostic, but with its own rules light setting that you can drop into pretty much any traditional dungeon crawly type game. And so
Yeah.
if you're a fan of the OSR, or if you're a fan of Dungeons and Dragons, I would highly encourage you to check it out. But Robert, you're working on, you have another project that just funded. So let's pivot a little bit after all those deep
Yeah.
existential conversations,
Heavy talk. Let's go lighthearted again.
and talk about just how dungeons are maintained and what the plumbers
Oh
in
my
them
god.
do.
So like it's kind of like that question, like do lady dwarfs have beards? Because in fantasy fiction for many years, like the women dwarfs were never written about, so it was a running gag in culture. Like where are the latrines at? Where are the outhouses? Where are the that's another thing in D&D. Where do people go to the bathroom at in the dungeon? So I've always been a fan of high fantasy and dark fantasy and all of that, but there's these other elements of fantasy out there that are underrepresented in tabletop RPGs. Usually, you just see them in video games, and that's cool. But I don't want to play video games at the table. But I like the genre, so I was like, well, bear with me here. Super Mario Brothers is fantasy. It is high fantasy. It is a magical kingdom with fireballs and weird items you pick up and different like abilities and stuff. And it just happens to be these 2 Italian plumbers get ported to the other dimension. You're fighting kappas, koopas, and all kinds of monsters and stuff. Final Fantasy VII, most of the Final Fantasy series, it's vehicles and magic. You got magic crystals and motorcycles and all kinds of gonzo stuff. And the more I looked into it, I was like, this could be a cool game. Eberron kind of touched on that in a way without really the gasoline element, but I was like, let's do a diesel punk. Let's do a diesel punk fantasy setting. Just maybe it'll be a one-off, maybe it'll be a series of zines, which I would ideally like to do, exploring that genre. But I'm going to start it with silly gonzo and then go more serious from there. And Dungeon Plumbers is about like the people that do the dirty jobs that even adventurers don't want to do. Like they go and work for the king, they work for the lich, they work for the bandit lord. They're going to go in, they're going to clear out the dungeon, and they're going to go the places that the adventurers are like, you know what, we'll come back there next time. Or, maybe we should leave that door locked because it smells bad. No, these guys are going to go down there and do it anyway.
Yeah, no, I love it. And it's a cool concept. We covered it a couple times during Zine Quest, but I know it's coming up for you. I know you're working on it right now, so I wanted to make sure we got a chance to talk about it. Also, there's a fantasy author named Drew Hayes. Actually, he's an author named Drew Hayes. He does science fiction and fantasy work. His primary book that a lot of people know is Superpowered, and it's probably free on Kindle, but which is a phenomenal study. But he has another one that is this very cool. Very much a dungeon crawly game where something about the setting that they're playing in has caused the characters in it to gain some sort of connection to the real world and have a level of sentience and control, and the NPCs are kind of coming alive also. But the players are still playing them to a certain degree as well. It's very weird, trippy concept that you've spent most of your time just at the character level, then it zooms out into player conversations every once in a while. But there's these. It's very clear that the people in our world are controlling the people in their world, and that the people in their world actually exist to a certain degree also. But they do a lot. There's a whole backside about like, hey, what are the servants and the NPCs in a dungeon? Like, what are they doing the rest of the time? And they had some really cool touchstones to Dungeon Plumbers also. So if you haven't checked it out, I can't remember the name of the series off the top of my head.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out.
Going Rogue is one of the ones in the series, and it may be the first one, but I don't know that it is. But Drew Hayes is the author, and it's absolutely phenomenal.
Cool.
Especially from a philosophical standpoint also, but has a lot of those gonzo touches as well, because they all class themselves incorrectly at first, because they class themselves based on their personality types rather than what they're actually good at, because they're all NPCs who basically pick up the mantle of trying to complete a task from a TPK'd party of adventurers. And so it's a really cool evolution. I think there's 4 books in the series now. But yeah, absolutely phenomenal to actually get a chance to sit down and talk to you. I know you said you don't do social media work well, so if people want to follow you, find out more about your work, what's the best place or way to do that?
Okay, so I just recently created a Facebook page for Weird Valley Press, WYRD Valley Press. On Instagram, you can find me at, I believe it's author Wayne Robert. Let me check that out for you really quick, because like I said, I suck at social media. Judas and Magnolia, you can find them at judasandmagnolia.com. You can check out their escape artist shows, where they're going to be throughout the country, what time of the year. It's author.wayne.robert is my Instagram account, and that's probably where I post more than anything else. And then Weird Valley Press for Facebook, and check me out on Drive-Thru RPG too.
Awesome. And we dropped the link to that both in the show notes as well as in the chat here. So if you want to go find a copy of Memento Mori, Memento Vivere, you can go to Drive-Thru RPG, check it out now, or track them down at a rennfaire sometime this summer if everyone's vaccinated and you want to go. If you have enjoyed this conversation, we do these types of conversations once or twice a week with different creators. We talked to Patrice Danielle Long yesterday about the Changing Stars Kickstarter. We have a few more coming up that I'm really excited about. Next week, though we're not as prepared to promote this as I would like to be, because I'm very excited about the conversation. We are devoting the entirety of next week to just conversations around itch funding, what it is and why it's a kinder, gentler way of crowdfunding projects, what it means to use the itch platform to fund a project that is in development. I've been doing it for the last couple of weeks with the project Divine Sublimation, which is a troika supplement for alchemy, which we extended for a week because I figured, hey, I'm doing an itch funding thing next week. But we're going to have Jeff Stormer, Keegan EXE, Pamu, Thomas, figuring other people. We have like 7 great people. Nick from Monkey Paw Games, a bunch of other people coming on over the course of next week talking about how you can crowdfund using itch instead of using Kickstarter, which statistically is better, is emotionally way less draining, and has some really cool potential, especially as your project is in development, when you might be looking at other types of crowdfunding or for different projects that you're trying to get off the ground. So we're going to talk about why that's a cool model for crowdfunding, next Wednesday, Thursday, Friday at 9 p.m., which is not our normal time, because a huge part of that conversation is how we make things accessible to people in Latin America, Brazil, and the SERPG communities, which cannot use Kickstarter due to their rules and regulations, which are their rules and regulations. It's fine. It's their platform. But it creates a lot of more accessibility on itch also too for some of those things. So if you're interested in that, come back next week, hit follow, like, subscribe, do all the things you can do. Also tonight, we're going to be playing The Zone, which is a horror RPG. It's GMless, with the creator Raph and some absolutely amazing folks. Come back at 8 p.m. to watch us do that. It is actually a fully digitally implemented game, so you can play it live online right now. There is also a print version, so you can play it live at your table in the future once people can do that again. Also, we don't think that creators, especially small indie creators, should have to pay for content to be created for their games. Our hope, our dream here at Plus One EXP is to help, again, great players find amazing designers whose game they can love, and help designers find amazing players who can love their games. If you want to support us financially, you can click the links below if you're on Twitch, or go to co-fi.com/plus1exp. Become a patron, or which isn't what they call it, but at any level. We give away physical copies of games every single month. We do digital copies of our games and a whole bunch of other stuff too. So if you want to help support this channel and get access to all those things, go check those out there as well. But this has been an absolutely phenomenal conversation. Wayne, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And we will look forward to playing some of your games in the future, checking out more of your games in the future, and seeing that beautiful beard again sometime. It's always great. Sorry, LARP Strong, that we were just rubbing it in your face the entire time. But until next time, this has been Prestige Class with Wayne Robert, and class is dismissed.
Thanks so much, Tony. Bye.